I'm going to throw in a Happy New Year. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, is joining us today. Happy New Year to you, Tom.
Happy New Year, Julia.
Good crimbo and New Year?
Absolutely. No, when I got the chance, in between everything going crazy in the world, as is always the case.
He's been one of those young people, and he's moaning about the fact that he's had to work over Christmas and New Year. You know that.
Who said I was moaning, Julia?
Oh, well, there was a bit of...
There was a bit.
Now, I'm just very excited you're actually here, although we've got, lovely sunshine coming through in London, the capital city. There is snow everywhere. My in-laws have been snowed in. They've got, digging themselves out in the snow. Lots of the country has got snow warnings. Everyone's being told, stay at home, don't go to school, don't go to work. We are once again... It's one of those slightly we can't cope countries. It's either raining too much, wrong leaves on the line, the snow, it's too hot, it's too cold, there's too much sun, there's too much snow, and we don't function. What's going on?
Is it a legacy of COVID thing? I mean, they didn't say...
No, it was happening a bit before then.
Well, I'm sure it was, but they didn't quite say... stay at home and protect the NHS, save lives. But there is often the undertone, isn't it? Is that whenever, as you say, it doesn't matter what the weather is, it doesn't matter what the climatic conditions are.
Oh, by the way, it's always climate change as well.
Yes, of course. Whether it's hot, cold, or in between, it's always climate change's fault. It's interesting. It has disproven all those people who said we were never going to see a white Christmas again.
I'm so shocked by that as well.
School children in Britain will never know what snow looks like, and yet, obviously, large parts.
I think all the skiing in the Alps was going to be over by about 5 years ago as well. That's going all right.
Exactly, but at least we've got all these warnings to tell us to worry, watch out for icy conditions when it's sub-zero, as if anyone needed to be told that who wasn't. Under the age of 5.
I kind of think of it as a Darwinian thing, which is kind of, natural selection. And if you can't function... Look, there are people who are in trouble, who can't get out. And even if you're elderly and you might fall, you've got a problem with balance, yeah, maybe this isn't a good day to go out. I mean, But the idea that schools are closed, I find so utterly ridiculous. Now, that said, we are a country which doesn't largely have extremes of weather. So when we go, Canada copes. Yeah, because it's basically snowing for like 3 months every year. And Norway, of course, the whole place is designed around that. Yeah. Or if it's somewhere that's always very, very hot in the summer, everything's designed around that as well. We kind of design our country around sort of moderate weather and a bit of rain. Although, again, my local tube station, for no good reason, has tiles on the floor, which apparently are slippery when wet, which is at least half of the year. But, if we don't plan that well. But it is a symptom of a country that's just sort of, be a bit risk averse. And if one teacher can't get in, none of the kids can come to school, as opposed to... So it's too dangerous for them in the playground to be at school or for them to get to school, but they can absolutely get to the nearest hill and go tobogganing all day, which is probably a better use of their time, let's be honest, given the state of most schools these days.
And also, you remember the crazy stories you'd hear, the number of times that train lines have to close because there are too many leaves on the track. We have autumn every year. You'd think they would be prepared for that.
Someone should tell the NHS.
It was too sunny once and they stopped a bunch of trains leaving. One of the, whether it's Clapham Junction or London Bridge, I can't remember. So, yeah, this is a very British disease to a certain extent.
We need to get on top of this stuff.
It's a weird mixture of just sort of fussing over things and hypochondria, which we seem to have picked up much more recently.
Exactly. Well, these are the people who say, it's raining a bit, so I can't go to work. But anyway, we've had our whinge about what's going on. Let's talk about international affairs, shall we? Because they do have an impact on us. A lot of people have a whole sort of view, what happens in... Whether it's, Iran or Israel or Ukraine, doesn't have any bearing on us, but of course it does, because it's about, people funding terrorism on our own streets. It's about the price of oil, the price of our energy bills. If you're worrying about putting the heating on right now, think international affairs, folks. Oh, and mad net zero policies as well, of course. But what's happened in Venezuela has been, leading the front pages since Saturday. It's an extraordinary story. This, as Americans are saying, look, this is raid on basically a narco-terrorist, and they basically pulled him into court. I mean, the perp walk, the helicopter, you name it. It was, they know how to put on the Hollywood, images in America when it comes to the suspects for crimes. But Nicolas Maduro telling the US court, he's a prisoner of war. His wife, rather sweetly saying, "I am the first lady of Venezuela." Sweetheart, I hate to tell you, you're not even the first lady in your cell in that Brooklyn prison anymore. It'll be about a year before they actually have the full trial, we reckon. He's going to do some sort of deal, who knows what. What do you make of the fact that his vice president has been sworn in? This is Delcy Rodriguez, apparently just as bad as Maduro. And the US president basically saying, we're going to run the country, you know, me and my mates Hegseth and Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller are going to run the Venezuela for the time being. No time at all for the Nobel Prize winning opposition leader who has basically said, I'll share my Nobel Peace Prize with you if you let me back in again. Does any of this add up to you as Donald Trump being concerned about narco-terrorism as opposed to just wanting the oil?
Well, it seems like it's probably a bit of column A and a bit of column B, and he's quite willing to allow the international community, people within Venezuela and other troublesome, as he would see it, countries, assume the worst. So when he came out and said we're going to run the country for a number of years, I mean, that, if he really is intent on doing that, would be an albatross around his neck. This is an enormous country, far, far bigger than Iraq, and we all know how that turned out. And also a country in which you haven't got a regime that's been displaced and ready to be replaced with something else. And he talks about we're going to get it to the point where the oil industry is back up on its feet. Maybe we'll be siphoning off some of that, who knows, keeping it very vague. That would take years and years and years and a huge amount of investment. You can't just suddenly create 21st century oil platforms at the snap of a finger. So it seems like, and this is only really a guess and speculation, because you have to read between the lines with Donald Trump, is that, as with many of his operations, he wants to get in and get out. You know, you drop the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, you take out Soleimani, the Iranian general, you know, hit the Houthis, but then you get out. Because anything else would be even crazier.
We're not good at nation building in the West, and you can't build democracy.
And that's where I guess that the Vice President Rodriguez comes in, because there's been a lot of reporting now suggesting that she was, via other intermediaries, trying to cut some sort of a deal in recent weeks, and that she's seen as someone who could basically, the regime continues with a more pliable person at its head.
It's not necessarily going to get that much better for the Venezuelan people in the near future, but, you know, we shall see. Well, look, let's bring it closer to home, because let's talk about what's happening in terms of the reaction to these threats to Greenland. He's also made threats to Colombia, he's made threats to Mexico, to Canada, you name it. But no one really thought, you know, he's going to, you know, make Canada the 51st state and all of that. But Greenland, I mean, the population 56,000, part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It basically has the same status, you know, diplomatically in terms of its relationship with Denmark as, say, you know, Scotland has. You know, it can run its own affairs, but foreign affairs and defence run by Denmark. It is part of the territory of Denmark, which is an EU member, but also a member of NATO. The warning from the Danish leader and other European leaders is, you know, basically, if you seize Greenland, that is going to be the end of NATO. Now, that's a question I'm going to be asking our audience today, because, as you know, you can always get in touch about anything. You're in charge of those phone lines. But with European leaders warning Donald Trump that any attempt to seize Greenland would spell the end of NATO. I want to know what your reaction is to that. I'll get to Thomas in just a moment. But give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at TalkTV. Calls, as you know, charged at the national rate altogether now. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. But, Tom, I mean, a lot of people may just say, look, I don't care. I mean, you know, Greenland is so irrelevant to me. It is definitely relevant strategically to the United States, but, you know, it's a territory of an ally country. What's the issue? There are defence strategic concerns, not just also the mineral reserves and the like, but in terms of China and Russia and their sort of making inroads around the Greenland territory and the risk to America from them. And they are a hostile nation, you know, rogue states. But would it be the end of NATO? And what would the implications for us be?
Well, if you think about the prospect, and I think it's an unlikely prospect at the moment, but who knows, of the US trying to strong arm or even potentially by force take territory.
Wouldn't need much force, realistically.
Well, it's not a lot of people there, as you say, but nevertheless, it's something where with a NATO nation, what could that possibly do other than unravel the whole alliance, or at least put it under severe strain? I do wonder how much of this is basically a bombastic opening salvo in what would be more of a kind of deal negotiation, which Donald Trump would be keener on. And I just don't understand, particularly where Greenland is concerned, why the US administration is so willing to do this in such a out there kind of fashion. You are talking about allies, you also are talking about sovereign territory, which, as you say, is nominally part of Danish territory, but also has its own independence. And if you listen to what the Greenlanders are saying, which surely should be a fair amount of the focus here, they don't want anything to do with this. America has a base there already. There's scope to expand that, not least if they didn't continue to act in such a bellicose fashion. It is strategically important, as you say, not least because the Arctic is going to become much more of a kind of battleground vis-a-vis Russia and China as the years roll on. But why they're doing this, other than to just sort of throw their weight around and to show that America is back, I don't understand.
And we've seen this again with Mexico and Canada as well. And I think, look, it's been a fascinating debate. And Keir Starmer's under a lot of pressure from his left-wingers, the backbenchers, the usual suspects, Emily Thornberry's and others, basically talk about, you've gone on about, international human rights, you've gone on about international law. I mean, good God, we have to give away the Chagos Islands because some court that has no bearing on us whatsoever thinks that we should. International law is all he talks about. And then, it's up to the Americans to justify what they did. Haven't really got a problem with it. But there is the case that Britain nor the UN recognised the Venezuelan government. This was a dictatorship. This was an unelected government. They had elections which they completely they were lost by Maduro, and he stayed in power. There is no legitimacy to that government whatsoever. That is very different from a democratic nation, a nation like Denmark, and its territory in Greenland. That's a very different prospect. And I find it fascinating how many people don't see that there is a big difference there. What do you make of that justification from Donald Trump? It's like when you're dealing with Maduro, you're talking about, a narco-terrorist. You're talking about somebody who's not only killing his own people, impoverishing his own people, deeply corrupt, but also somebody who has been basically funneling Colombian cocaine into America, working with the Iranians, the Russians and the Chinese. Working with the Iranians to fund Hezbollah, funding, weaponry, money laundering and drug dealing, out of Lebanon. Again, Lebanon is a huge source of international drug supply. Again, it used to fund that terrorist organisation. What happens on the other side of the Atlantic and what happens on the other side of the Med is still impacting our countries right now. I want these people taken out. I want him out of office. I'm really happy with what he's done. But does that mean that we would let him get away with doing it to any country? When it comes to war, conflict, intervention, what have you, I think we've got to get out this trap of looking through this purely legalistic lens. Like, would Iraq have been any less disastrous if it had got the UN sign-off? That's an absurd proposition. Similarly, where this is concerned, I think what we've got to judge this by is, what are the aims here? Is it legitimate by the kind of norms of just war and conflict? And do we think it's going to have the desired effect? As you say, Maduro was utterly illegitimate. He was only in power because of rigged elections, corruption, enriching himself, all the rest of it. That said, particularly with the experience of Iraq, there are other questions you might want to raise before taking someone like that out, insofar as, do you create a vacuum which is filled by something worse? Is this going to have... That's probably why they've left the same party in power. Quite. Is there going to be unintended consequences? Is it ultimately better to allow for people like this to be deposed internally, whether that's by military or people on the street, what have you? All of those questions are completely fine and important to raise. This legalistic thing, I think, is just an excuse to not have those difficult questions, and also to just it just becomes a stick with which to beat certain decisions. But also, and I think you and I disagree on the Iraq War, but people's argument about the Iraq War was illegal. It's illegal because the UN didn't sign off it, because permanent members of the UN Security Council include Russia and China. I'm sorry, excuse me if I don't give two figs what Russia and China think about the morality or legality of anything. And what I find utterly fascinating at the moment is this talk about this rules-based international order, as if it's now broken. And now all these rogue states can act with impunity. Putin invaded Georgia, Crimea, Ukraine as a whole, while we had a rule-based international order. Assad was, murdering his own people while we had a rule-based international order. Iran has waged terrorist war on the West while we've had an international, a rules-based international order. By the way, also, when Argentina invaded the Falklands, where was the UN then? Where was the help from our allies then? Because I don't recall us getting any help, even I think from America, even though very, very, very late in the day. It seems to me to be just very, very clear that this is an absolute farce. This idea that we have to set the standard for how everyone else should behave. The rogue states will behave however they want to behave, and in whatever way they think they can get away with. China will invade Taiwan if they think they can get away with it.
Quite.
Full stop. It's got sod all to do with any international law or any sort of UN Security Council resolution.
I completely agree. I found that whole discussion about what precedent does this set, what message does this send, absolutely facile. I mean, in a sense, of course, you should stand up to the principles that you claim to believe in, which is why I think Keir Starmer has got such a sticky situation over all this. International law was the one thing he ever sincerely seemed to believe in, and now he's junked that because it was politically expedient.
But he's junked that because it's in Britain's interest for him to shut up about it.
But he is precisely the sort of person who, if he weren't in government, would have been on social media saying, what message does this send to Putin's Russia? And that would have been his actual take. But yeah, the idea that people seem to have forgotten that Russia invaded Ukraine, so what they're going to do, invade it again as a consequence of what has happened there. And also the idea that, Xi Jinping is sat there thinking, I really do want to take back Taiwan. I did say I would unify the territories, but I live in terror of a communique or a legal writ from one of the international courts.
This is the joke.
We all know it's absurd, so let's now drop the pretense, regardless of how we feel about the Venezuela situation.
Do you think the pressure from backbenchers, the Emily Thornberry, you're under more pressure Emily Thornberry sits on you, frankly, over this international law thing. Do you think that's going to be an issue for Keir Starmer? Can everyone stop sniggering at the back?
I was stifling laughter. I don't think it will be an issue for him outside of liberal left politics. He's handed his backbenchers, the Green Party and the Lib Dems a stick with which to beat him, because he's already he looks like a hypocrite and he looks like he's weak in front of Donald Trump.
Might be some sticky dinner parties in North London.
Quite. But does the public care? No. But I think this is...
According to polls, public's largely opposed to this this invasion, though.
Which doesn't surprise me. And I think people also...
People are largely opposed to wars.
No, exactly. And I think for understandable reasons, people have seen them go wrong so many different times now. And also I think the public are correct to say that you can't... You've got to be careful before you do things like this.
But also I think, again, we discussed it on the show yesterday, the mainstream media in this country has been very remiss in terms of actually talking about just how awful the Maduro regime is and has been. Starmer today is off in Paris. He's at yet another meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. Coalition of the Willing to do what over Ukraine? This, by the way, as he's preparing a post-Brexit bill to transfer more powers, sovereign powers from the UK to the EU, because we're going to have this thing called dynamic alignment when it comes to a lot of EU rules. This again, we're not backtracking on Brexit. No, he's not breaching his manifesto, but we are going to basically follow exactly the same rules as the EU, no matter what they impose, so that we can do what we're told by them, so we can have freer trade with the EU, and basically not be able to make our own laws on things. I'm pretty sure that wasn't what Brexit was about.
No, of course it wasn't. I mean, it's a worse deal than one could possibly imagine. I mean, if you're talking about dynamic alignment, following single market rules in even more sectors than we already do, but without any say over it by dint of not being members, it's a worse deal than we ended up with. It only really makes sense as a stalking horse back towards rejoining.
We know that's what they're going to do.
Of course. And similarly with the customs union thing, there's a reason that no one just joins the customs union. I mean, Turkey did, and it took them decades, and it was only supposed to be a stepping stone into joining the European Union proper, because it's a terrible situation. You have no control over your own trade policy, but you nevertheless have to put up with the rules being set and the deals being struck in Brussels. But I can't work out whether it is a stalking horse to remain, which I think even Labour are sensible enough, or most of them are sensible enough to think
they can't do it.
They can't reopen that wound.
And of course
they also can't do it in the amount of time that they're likely to be in power. But I also think it's just taken on a kind of identity for the liberal left. Like, we need to be closer to Europe because that makes us good people. It is somehow undoing the wrongs of Tory Brexit years without necessarily thinking about it for longer than 5 seconds.
I'd love it if we got Marine Le Pen or whoever be leading her party in power in a couple of years' time in France, the AfD in Germany, and would they still think that it was a good thing to be allied to the EU, which is apparently the font of all goodness in the world? Just finally, before we go to calls and a break, I just want to ask you about the West Midlands Police, because the leaders of both Westminster Police and Birmingham City Council are going to be grilled by MPs later today. They've been recalled, particularly the West Midlands Police boss, over basically, the fact that basically he and his fellow police officers, the Chief Constable, they lied. They simply lied. This is a guy called Craig Guilford. They appeared at a Home Affairs Select Committee before, and they basically claimed, and they repeatedly claimed, this is all over the Maccabi Tel Aviv ban of that match in Birmingham against Aston Villa. And they basically said, well, we got all these warnings from the police in Amsterdam that these fans were really unsafe, they were going to cause troubles, and that's why we banned them. It's now now emerged quite categorically, and they claimed we spoke to Jewish community leaders, and they're like, okay, they didn't speak to Jewish community leaders. That was they specifically named people who said, you never spoke to me, and no communication with you whatsoever. They also said they had this information from the police in Amsterdam. Amsterdam police said, that's not at all what we told you. That simply never happened. Mm-hmm. They've given the exact opposite evidence, both in public and in private. That is very, very clear, saying that the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were not responsible for what was basically called literally a Jew hunt and a match there, which led to a huge number of convictions. And by the way, none of those were the Tel Aviv fans. And they basically they basically claimed they've had evidence for this choice, this ban, when it turns out they decided to ban the match and then decided to come up with some evidence. And they decided to ban the match after talking to various different imams at different mosques, including mosques which have hosted blatant hate preachers and anti-Semitic ranting preachers. There's no doubt at all. I mean, this guy, Craig Guilford, the Chief Constable of Westminster Police, he has gone to Parliament. He has lied. Well, he's lied to the people of Birmingham, lied to the people of Britain. He's made up stuff on this, lied to Parliament effectively, and he's still in his job. Yeah. It's extraordinary. I mean, if you're going to do that, how can we trust you on anything else?
No, it's absolutely shameful. He should go. He should be sacked, forget resigning. He should be held to account, because this story shames not just West Midlands Police, but I think the whole kind of multicultural state, the way that this has worked. The fact that they essentially decided that the presence of these Israeli Jewish fans was so inflammatory to certain sections of the community, because they have to talk in, euphemisms when they're discussing this, that essentially we've got to ban them first and work out why later. Yeah. The fact that they were then going around saying that the police in Amsterdam had said things to them which they categorically didn't say, that they spoke to Jewish community leaders that they categorically didn't speak to, and that they openly misled. And the fact that the details which have tumbled out since, which that in these private meetings they were saying we do not have any intelligence, but we're going to ban it anyway, essentially, utterly shamed. And because of the fact they came to the conclusion, understand, unfortunately, with some reason, that the presence of Israeli Jews in Aston, in Birmingham, given all that's going on in the world, puts those Israelis, those Jews in peril.
And why? Shouldn't we deal with the actual reason why?
Quite.
Again, this is sectarian politics writ large in our country, and it's happening right now. It's extraordinary. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show as well.